Hi, I'm Lindsay from Shreve Memorial Library and welcome to Art Club. This week, for a change, we're going to do something similar to what we did last week. Think of it as a variation on a theme. We aren't going to do a bookmark, but we're going to do a similar painting, but with different colors. So we're going to do another landscape and just kind of imagine it as an extension of that narrow bookmark that we did. And you can totally pull it off in exactly the same colors and just do it the same way as we did the one with the orange and the red last week. But this time I'm going to do it with blue. Here are my supplies. I have 2 watercolors. This is a purple and a blue. Specifically, and you don't need these specific colors, I'm just letting you know what they are. They are Carbazole Violet, which is just kind of a bluey purple that'll get really dark pretty easily. And I think this is Indigo. I always label my watercolor pans, so I always know what they are because they end up in weird places sometimes. Anyway, and Indigo, which is just a blue that tends to dark. And it just, these colors will probably go very well together. I don't use these colors very often. Indigo for me, whenever I do a watercolor galaxy, is definitely my go-to color. I just think it's fantastic for deep, dark night skies. But yeah, really, and I can't think of the last time I used Carbazole Violet, like really on purpose, other than wanting a purple. Anyway, so these are the 2 colors. Blue and purple will work. If you can't get a dark enough blue, add a wee tiny bit of black to your blue and that should darken it okay without turning it too green. Anyway, I also have white gouache. You can use anything, any kind of white paint. You can use paint markers. You can use acrylic. White acrylic would work great. You can use whatever. I'm using gouache. It's essentially the same as watercolor and acrylic, and it's just it's opaque. So I'm gonna use that. I have my little palette. This is 5x7 paper. You can use whatever size you want. You can do another bookmark. It is taped down so it doesn't buckle. And I have some brushes. I have a big brush for a gradient that we're gonna do like we did last week. A smaller brush for some mountains, a tiny brush for some trees, and a toothbrush because this time we're going to spatter stars instead of doing them individually. Though if you want to do it individually, like with a gel pen or something, go for it. That's totally cool. You can do it exactly like we did last week. Anyway, that's what we're going to do. I'm just kind of showing, yeah, a variation on a theme. This is just kind of the same thing, just different. Now you'll see I don't have a pencil. I'm not going to do a sketch on this one. I'm just going to, the only thing on here is the mountains, and I'm just going to let them happen. If you want to sketch it, if you would feel better, just, yeah, get a pencil and do some jagged lines and make mountains. You'll see how I'm going to layer them, but other than that, just go for it. Let's just make this a nice, pleasant, easy painting. Let's go. First things first, I'm going to wet our paper. We're going to do wet and wet like we did last time, which just means that we are going to paint with wet paint on wet surface. So I'm wetting my surface. I want it to be wet. I want a good sheen to be on it, but I do not want puddles because the paint will pool in puddles and I will be unhappy with the result. So get a good look from whatever angle you need to see it. And let's get to the paint part. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with blue. Lots of blue. Oops, it's already on my paper, but that's okay. I am going to add blue to the top and just make it super duper potent straight out of the pan. I'm going to get this to be as dark as I can because remember that watercolor dries significantly lighter than it looks when it's wet. I'm going to do that. I'm going to add a little bit of purple in here. I'm going to clean off my brush pretty well. Okay. And have to do all of this while it's still wet, so you kind of need to do it in a hurry. See that? Yeah, okay. I get some purple. I'm going to add some purple in around the middle point. And fade it down to the bottom. I want it a little more potent at the top. Get some more paint. Okay, I'm going to add that about here, and remember, just do it fairly quickly. This is just kind of showing the end of a sunset. That last tiny bit of pink. Okay, at this point, about done with this background. I really don't want to have to give it 2 coats, and I might, but we'll see. I'm going to get back to my blue. I'm just going to darken this at the top. Let's bring it down. You see, I want it super light at the bottom because we're going to be painting over it, and that looks good to me. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let it dry partially, just sitting here, because if you pull out a hairdryer, you speed dry something, and the watercolor is still pretty wet, it can run in places that you don't want, and you'll get effects that you don't want if you want it kind of smooth, which is what I want. So I'm going to let it sit until I don't think it'll move around, and then I will dry it, and we'll be back. Okay, my painting is dry, and this is definitely dark enough for my taste, but you see what happened over here, and that's mainly because of the paper, but that doesn't really matter. I'm unhappy with it. So if yours isn't dark enough, or else if something like this happens, see, the problem was this part, this little white lighter part, what buckled up higher than this part, and so it pooled in there, and that's what happened. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wet it again. Okay, and if you re-wet, again, paper quality, make sure it's dry completely, and actually it looks like that will just solve my problem. Make sure it's dry completely, and then brush very lightly, okay? Like seriously, very, very lightly, because at some point you're going to start picking up the paint underneath, and then you might be unhappy if it doesn't mix well. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing and wait for it to dry again, but this time I am going to prop it up. I'm just going to prop it up on my tape roll here, because I want all of that stuff, all the dark stuff, to stay at the top, and I don't want it coming down the sides. So I'm going to let it dry again. Okay, my painting is dry, mostly. And I see that my feline supervisor is keeping track of what's going on behind us. Let me straighten that out. This is good enough for my taste. It's not perfect, but you know. Okay, here's what I'm going to do now. I have a scrap of paper. I don't want this whole thing to be covered in stars. I don't really want it to go below my mountain. So I'm going to put this about here, just because I don't want my stars to go below that. So here's what I'm going to do. Paint. Again, acrylics are fine. Just something that is, paint markers are great, gel pens are great. Just something that is opaque and white to do stars. So whatever you have is fine. I really like gouache. Gouache is my favorite type of paint, I believe. Okay, so I have my toothbrush stained with acrylic from, what was it? We did some art club thing that I put stars on, but also used yellow. Yeah, it was unfortunate, but it's acrylic, so it's not going anywhere. Anyway, okay, my paint is my water is a little blue, but that's okay. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to get some paint. Now, depending on what kind of paint you're using, you'll want more water. Like if it's thicker than this is very thin paint. like acrylic, you will probably want to use more water than I'm using. So if you've never done it before, this is all you do. You pull your thumb over the you pull your thumb down the toothbrush and it just spatters on there. Test it on a piece of colored paper or something else to make sure that you're getting what you want. And then just do that and put as many stars or as few stars as you want. If you get one that's like runny, call it a comet. It's all good. Okay, that's probably enough for this painting. I don't want a ton. And since I had this there, the stars stop right about when it gets lighter. So that's it for that part. And since we're not touching that part, we can go on and move on to the next bit. So we're going to do 3 layers of mountains. Now, if you've ever been to a place with mountains and they're in a row, the closest ones to you are darker than the farthest ones back, and they usually like blue out in the distance. So I'm going to paint back to front, which means that I want my back mountain to be lighter than the first. So I'm not going to use like fully pigmented paint for the back one. Let's see. So I'm going to use purple. So I have this purple here. That's probably pretty good actually. So I'm going to wet it. Let's see what that looks like. A little more. I need it to show up. So, but I don't want it too dark. And again, remember that that's too much water. That watercolor dries lighter, so keep that in mind. And here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to start here, and this is arbitrary, and I'm going to make some mountain shapes. So I'm just going to say there's a mountain coming up here. There's a peak. Oops, I went over my stars. Now you see what happens if you do that. Okay, and it's going to come up like this, and then it's going to fade down, which just means I'm not adding any more any more paint. I'm just going to go down until I can just say that the other mountain, the next mountain, is going to overlap it. And you see why I didn't want the stars there, but I still hit one of them, and that's just, there's just a star in front of the mountain. It's magic. That's fine. Don't worry about it. So now I have my first mountain, and you saw I just made kind of a mountain shape. Not something to stress out about. Do a peak or two, do however you want, and then dry it. And I'm not worried about it pooling or going anywhere because I didn't use that much water this time around. So I'm just going to dry it. That is dry enough. And now I'm going to add more paint to this. I want it darker. Okay, so there was our first one. This is darker, you see? And it will run together if your painting isn't dry. So make sure it's dry first. And I'm just going to say this one comes up here. You can have it overlap if you want. Woo! Little peak there. And then comes down here. Okay? I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I am going to just bring it down until I'm sure the next one will hit it. If you want to be fancy, get some of the paint off your brush with water, and you can come down here and kind of like scribble in, and this will look kind of like misty if it's lighter. You have to get it pretty light down here, and you see I'm just kind of scribbling. Okay, and now I am going to dry this. Okay, for our last layer of mountains, I want this one to be super duper dark. I need it darker than that one. Okay, and I'm going to add a wee bit of this blue back in, and that'll just help darken it since this is a nice dark blue. Okay. And we'll see what this looks like. Too much water. Add more purple. Let's see now. Better. Okay. So we're just going to do the same thing. This one is coming from, say, down here. I'm going to make just another mountain. It can overlap that one. It cannot. Okay. And then I'm going to bring it down some. I'm going to get some water on my brush. And I'm going to make this fuzzy. It will get lighter. Like that. Just bring it down. We're going to put some trees on top of this. Okay? See, I'm going to bring this like that. I just want a sharper edge. Okay, now I'm going to dry this thoroughly, and then we will add trees, and then we are going to add a moon. Okay, if you, like me, ended up with too much of a line here, remember the main rule is wait till it dries to do anything with it. Okay? Seriously, just wait till it dries, and then you can go back over the part that you need to go back over. That, I suggest you just go over the whole thing right there if you need to, and then just bring it all down. It'll be darker, but you can get some of that line off of there. But remember, once it starts drying, don't touch it until it is dry. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my tiny brush, and I'm going to make some trees. And these trees are going to be exactly like the ones that I did last week, just in a different color, not in ink. So I'm going to get blue straight out of here, which means I want it super potent, right? I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did last week. I'm going to draw some lines. They can be as tall or as short as you want. I suggest you make them not the same height or the same distance apart, because I think that looks better, or at least more realistic to the earth. So do some close together, some far apart. I'm going to be covering up these lines, so I'm not really worried about them. Let's see. In the end, you probably won't be able to see them at all. Just do as many or as few little trees as you want. Okay, that will probably do it for me. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give them leaves. I'm going to do it the same way that I did the other one. I start at the top, right, and then just kind of scribble in. I don't want them to be perfectly symmetrical. Just scribble it in, kind of shake your hand. You want things to overlap. You want things to be kind of messy, because that's what trees look like when it's dark outside and you see them from a distance, right? So just go through. I mean, I guess the only real rule is they get wider at the bottom. So just go through and scribble your way through some trees, and then we will have an almost completed painting. Here are our trees. I like them. They'll look better once they're a little drier. It's a little hard to see the ones on the right because this purple is so dark, but that's cool. It's nighttime. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get as much of this paint off as I can and get clear water as I can on this thing without... Okay, there we go. So now I'm going to go into my gouache, and this is possibly my favorite thing about gouache. As you see, it had dried. This is regular gouache. This is not acrylic gouache. because acrylic gouache, when it dries like acrylic and is watercolor. Or if you have acrylic and and it's dried, it's just dry. But this is what gouache has in common with watercolor, and why I like it so much is that you can reactivate it. Anyway, so I'm going to put a moon in here. Whether you put a moon in, it is your decision completely. I think I want a moon. I'm going to try not to get my hand in the trees. I'm going to put a moon right here, kind of in the middle, and I will make it kind of like a Van Gogh moon. I'm just going to do kind of like a C, that, and then pull it in like that. Just make it a little bit rounder. I think that's cute. Big old moon up in there. Okay. You can do a little moon, you can do a big moon, you can do whatever you want. You can skip the moon. I like it. You can put in some comets. Comets are fun. You can put in some big stars. You can do whatever you want. But I'm going to call this done. And let's see. I guess I probably need to sign. Here's another thing that I really, really like about gouache is that you can mix watercolor into it and get opaque watercolor. So I've just made a light purple with that. You can sign it with whatever. This looks dry enough. And I'm going to sign my painting right here with this light purple I just made by sticking some watercolor in my gouache. So I've signed my painting. I think it's cute. I hope you think it's cute. It was fun. Definitely like a stress relieving type painting, I think. I really like doing trees like that, like the low stress, just scribble trees. So that was fun for me, and I like the big moon. I think it's cute. So here is our painting, and you see how it is very, very similar in so many ways to the bookmark we did last week. So I think it's cute. Anyway, if you painted along with me today or drew along or whatever you did, please take a picture and send it into the library's social media. We love to see what you do. And yeah, join me next week for more art club where we will do more art. Bye.